Hey gang, thanks for checking out this video. I really had a great time making it, and it had gotten to be so big that I decided to chop it up into chunks. So in this first one, we're going to just be doing an overview of Bretonnia as a kingdom and the differences between 5th edition, when it was first brought into the Warhammer world, and the subsequent editions following. I hope you enjoy it, and if you can, hit that like button, leave me a comment down below before you go. Sit back, relax, and let's talk Bretonnia. What is up, players? It's Warboss Tay up in this mug. Welcome to my lore and fiction video for the Kingdom of Bretonnia in the Warhammer Fantasy universe. Now, when you talk about the Kingdom of Bretonnia, you have two different versions of it. You have the 5th edition Bretonnia, where they were first revealed. There's this whole new quote-unquote good faction. It's full of knights in shining armor, and it's going to be bright and colorful, and it's going to take a lot of real-world influences like King Arthur, the story of Robin Hood and Joan of Arc, and we're going to put them into this fantasy element. And it was a lot more optimistic. It was a lot more idealistic and positive. There was a lot of romanticized imagery in that 5th edition. And then when they went into 6th edition and they started tending more towards the grim dark of the Warhammer Fantasy universe, then they really decided to change direction with the Bretonnian fiction. Instead of in the 5th edition, where you had it possible that a peasant, through brave acts of momentous courage, could be elevated into the knighthood, in 6th edition, Bretonnian's big thing was that there was this huge, unsurmountable chasm between the two classes of the peasantry and the nobility. And that's where a lot of their charm comes from. The fact that the Bretonnian nobility touts their kingdom and their culture as following to a fault the ideals of chivalry, nobility, and integrity, and chastity. On the other hand, they turn around and they step all over the peasants on their way out of the castle, and they kick them over in the mud because the peasants to them are not equal. They are not seen as living people. So with Bretonnia being so faceted in 6th edition going forward, I wanted to focus on that culture and that fluff with this video. So let's just dive into it. Bretonnia is a kingdom that was located west of the Grey Mountains and the Empire, where the Empire is your quote-unquote good guy faction. They are separated by the mountain range of the Grey Mountains, and everything on the other side of Bretonnia, they're very, very distinctly separated. They move and pass through the mountains for trade and for adventure, but generally, if you're in the Empire, you stay on your side and you only hear stories of Bretonnians and the other way around. It wasn't easy, is what I'm saying, to go from the kingdom to the Empire. Carefully protected by its brave and honorable knights, which are regarded as the greatest in the old world, Bretonnia is a land of chivalry and honor, which is balanced against the poverty and oppression of its peasantry. So Bretonnia is ruled by a king. The throne is usually passed from father to eldest son. A new king is crowned by the Fey Enchantress, who is the high priestess, pretty much, of the Lady of the Lake. And she's the only one who technically outranks the king. In Bretonnia, you have 14 different dukedoms, each ruled by its own duke, each with its own colors and history, just like the different city-states of the empire. Most nobles live in mighty castles in the countryside, surrounded by a village, and only the castles of a handful of dukes protect developed towns, which sport the same name as their respected provinces. The people of Bretonnia consider the life in towns to be somewhat unnatural, fit only for the most desperate and poor. The largest towns are seaports, centers of trade, and harbors of the Bretonnian fleet. The Bretonnian fleet was featured in the Mana War game, the old game that was about naval combat. And it's funny because Bretonnia, being such a knights in shining armor, charging across the field type of army, you wouldn't think that they had so much focus on their navy, but there was fluff and there was great fiction and background, and even I think books were featured about the Bretonnian Navy and how they supported and reinforced the military on the land. So you've got two classes, like I said, the nobility and the peasantry. The noble class is ruled by the king, and it's composed of dukes, marquises, earls, barons, and knights. Bretonnia society is patriarchal, but noblewomen seem to be respected. All fit male nobles are knights and follow a code of chivalry, holding noblesse oblige and honor in high regard. While using bows to hunt during the peacetime, all nobles refuse to use any ranged weaponry during times of war because they consider it dishonorable. That's one of the reasons why Bertrand the Brigand, in the 5th edition when he was revealed, did not decide to accept the knighthood after all of the brave deeds that he had done for his country. He was offered the chance to become knighted and to pretty much rule Bergerac and that little area and set up his own household and everything like that. But he decided not to. He decided he wanted to stay with his longbow, which was his favorite weapon, and he didn't want to have to give that up. The peasants, on the other hand, have nearly no rights. They are illiterate and uneducated. They're considered property and must surrender 9/10 of their crops to their feudal lord. As a result, most peasants will remain extremely poor throughout their entire lives. When you're shackled under such terrible conditions, it only makes sense that you're not going to be able to elevate yourself. And that's why Bretonnian nobles didn't want the peasants to learn what life was like in the Empire, because in the Empire you could pretty much make your fortune if you had enough willpower, enough gumption, and pretty much bravery to rise above your station. In Bretonnia, it was just about impossible to rise above your station. Now, the balance to this was that the nobility would take that huge tithe of 9/10 of what the peasants earned, and if you were ruled by a good lord who was honorable and had integrity, then he would use those funds to take care of you and your family, to take care of the land, to make things better. More often than not in the fiction, though, you've got selfish, corrupt, immoral rulers and nobility who took advantage of the peasants and pretty much kept themselves rich and fat in their castles while leaving the poor to suffer. And that's the biggest stereotype of the Bretonnian people, is that the peasants worked and slaved and broke their backs, and the rich took everything that they earned, and even though it was their duty to take care of the peasants and the people under their care, just about all of them used that money to keep themselves comfortable and happy. Another thing about the peasants are not allowed to leave their home province unless they're granted permission, special permission. So you're born on a farm, you live your life on the farm, you die on the farm. Even if you want to go and work, do the exact same thing, live the peasant life somewhere else, your local lord has to grant you the permission to travel. Otherwise, they can throw you in jail or otherwise punish you. And I think it's just another way of the nobles keeping the working man down. Many peasants, as a result, have a certain degree of inbreeding, and they are afflicted with club feet, extra fingers, lazy eyes, or similar defects. I'm pretty sure this little bit of background is from the Warhammer Fantasy source book, which was called Knights of the Grail, and it really dove into the culture of Bretonnia and the people. And such great details were found in it. It's almost impossible to get. I think on eBay I found one for like $400. Man, I had a copy of that book when I was really into Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I think I picked it up for like $20. And then, yeah, people just went crazy. Supply and demand. Bretonnian justice is harsh, and any peasant who is caught stealing or poaching is usually hanged. An even harsher punishment is dealt to a peasant who attacks a noble. Now, knowing everything you do about what I had said about the nobility and how they really disdain and sneer down at the peasants who they don't even consider to be human, almost akin to a faithful animal. Imagine if one of these subhuman animals like flat out attacked you and you're a noble. What is the harshest punishment you can think of? Well, what they did was they would have you tortured and slowly dismembered, along with your family and all of your friends and all of your acquaintances and everyone you ever knew would go to their little cottages and cripple them. And that's terrible because that means they can't work. Jeez. And that's like the price a nobleman is willing to pay if you throw a piece of dung at him, or you throw a rock at his head while he's walking through your little mud village. He's gonna torture and dismember you and your family, and then he's gonna find everyone you ever knew and cripple them. Such is the price of rebellion. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to be talking about the culture of Bretonnia, a little bit about their religion, and then in part 3 we're going to look at the military units, how they fight, and break down all the various units between the nobility and the peasantry. And that applies more towards the fantasy tabletop games and all the great figures you see through Games Workshop. Hope you enjoyed this video. Again, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you thought, and don't forget to hit the like button before you go. We'll see you in the next one. Latest, players!